We're going to talk about kissing and hugging, snuggling, holding hands, oral sex, all that stuff. By the end of this video, I'm going to give you one boundary that you definitely can set that will help you steer the cloudiness of Christian intimacy and sexuality. Boundaries on your dating is important, but they're really powerless unless you have a good reason to keep them. So in this video, we are gonna talk about 3 things. Number 1 is good sex, number 2 is bad sex, and number 3 is how to fight for the good and flee from the bad. Every Pixel Pulpit video is about exploring hot topics from everyday life with faith in Jesus from 4 perspectives: our experience, our culture, history, and God's work. We're a new channel, so if you like the content, then maybe tell a friend, give us a thumbs up, and ding! I'm Benny, by the way, and this is
Maggie.
We've been married since 2007, but
yeah, Benny and I started dating and pretty much got into a sexual relationship right away.
yeah,
We tried to justify it. We were not married.
we tried to say that we were, in God's eyes. Even in our marriage, as we pursued Jesus further, we found that the sexual impurity that we had lived in continued to affect our relationship, even like, how many years into it?
12.
12. We felt like we were too far gone, but if we knew how Jesus changes things,
You don't want to cheapen what God has given you by taking the gift and making it into something you just feel like in a whim. And you don't want to insult Jesus by saying that he can't fix what's been broken when that's what he came to do. Look at
okay, now get out of here. Now, if you went to a church youth group like I did, you definitely heard one thing about sex, and that is do not have sex before marriage. Sounds like a pretty black and white, easy thing to follow until... Wow. Adding to the complexity is the fact that there's a huge dichotomy between God's definition of sex and our culture's definition of sex. You know that I don't have to reach very far to find examples of hypersexuality in culture. So let's skip the long description. Maybe I can just say this: pussy, smash, eggplant, cake, Netflix and chill. These really normal things are sexualized by our culture. But the phrase hypersexualization is actually pretty subjective, because sure, we're on the tail end of a sexual revolution, but we're not the first culture to bring open sexuality into the center of attention. Ancient Mesopotamia, the Roman and Asian empires, swinging back and forth between open sexuality and the sanctity of marriage, because there's actually a huge cost for both sides. When the sanctity of marriage is overstated as an ultimate goal, then the very real emotions and arousals that we're hardwired with begin to spill into the other areas of our life where they do not belong. And that's how really bad stuff happens in secret, like abuse and rape and pedophilia. When open sexuality becomes the ultimate goal, then the value and purpose of intimacy is muddied up with just whatever feels good at the time. I think a super apt example of this in recent history is between Kanye and Kim.
I just feel like I've just went through this transition where from being a rapper, like looking at all these girls and looking at my wife, like, oh, my girl needs to be just like the other girls, showing her body off, showing this, showing that.
Kanye and Kim were enjoying the benefits of open sexuality in their lives for a long time together.
And I didn't realize that that was affecting like my soul and my spirit as someone that's married and loved and the father of like now with about to be 4 kids.
Kanye's starting to feel different about the boundaries that he had set earlier on in his life.
You now say that you're not into me wearing a tight
You
dress.
are my wife, and it affects me when pictures are too sexy. It's hot. It's like it's hot for who though?
They're not even talking about dry sex or hand jobs. They're talking about clothing and modesty. That's a pretty great example of the pain and struggle we feel with our open sexuality in the culture today. And over the last 70 years, we've definitely made leaps and bounds away from the hyper-conservative legalism that once stifled authenticity about the way sex makes us feel, but now we're stuck with the epidemic of heartbreak and cultural promiscuity and just like a whole generation of soul hurt. As we turn to the Bible to hear God's perspective, we'll see that an underlying problem is that even if there was a balance between the two, perfectly in the center, it still really wouldn't be that close to God's plan for sexuality and intimacy. But before we get to that, question time. What are romantic relationships usually about? What do you think they should be about? Why do you think God made people so hungry for sexual intimacy? Last question, what is God's reason for sex? All right, think about those questions. Take them seriously because things are about to get intense. Leave your answers in the comments. That's a great idea. We'll definitely get to how far is too far, but I promise you, what you really want to know is how close can you get to good sex. The Bible has a surprisingly high level of sexual subject matter. I'm not going to go through it all, so I'm going to break it down into 4 categories. Historical bad, poetic bad, historical good, poetic good, and instructive kind of tells us the difference between the good and the bad. We're going to start with the historical bad stuff. So that's stories from the life of people like Sarah, Rachel and Leah, Dinah, Judah and Tamar, Potiphar and Joseph, Absalom and Tamar, Levite's concubine, Uriah. There's actually a lot. There's a lot of bad sex stories in the Bible, even in the New Testament with Herod and the Corinthians. Then there's poetic bad stuff, like anywhere the Bible uses the word whore or whorings or whoredom. A lot of horrible poetry in the Bible. And the prophets like Jeremiah and Isaiah, and especially Hosea and Ezekiel 16. The poetics of bad sexuality in the Bible kind of paint a picture that the history can't, and that's just the pain of heartache. Then we got the historical good stuff like Adam and Eve and Isaac and Rebecca, Solomon's bride, Boaz and Ruth. I think that's it. I can't think of any more. Healthy sexuality in the Bible is so rare that when Jesus starts preaching about what a healthy relationship actually looks like in Matthew 19, his disciples can't believe that it's possible. Okay, so what's the poetic good stuff? The whole book of the Songs of Solomon tells the story of a courtship or dating relationship as it blossoms into becoming a marriage. And it even goes into the sensuality of the honeymoon in metaphorical detail. Songs of Solomon, if you're looking for that, it's in the middle of the Bible. It's kind of spicy. Then there's Revelation 21, which paints the picture of Jesus rescuing his bride and then consummating his connection with her in his kingdom. My personal favorite being Proverbs 5, 18 and 19. Rejoice in the wife of your youth, a lovely deer, a graceful doe. Get this. Let her breasts at all times fill you with delight. It's in the Bible. And be intoxicated always in her love. That is a great piece of biblical literature. Poetic and instructive. All right, that's 4 of them, the history and poetics of good and bad sex in the Bible. Those 4 things in God's message to humanity are making 2 things very clear. 1, bad sex hurts real bad for a long time, like multi-generational time. The physicality and mentality of our sex lives is filled with this spiritual magnitude, and it really hurts when it comes apart. And the second thing we learn from biblical history and poetics is that good sex and marriage are the same subject. And they're connected inextricably and on purpose by a thing called covenant, a promise made by a whole life for a lifetime. The whole Bible is like a story of covenants that God uses to explain who he is and what he values. Marriage is one of those lifelong covenants that God values. And all Bible covenants have 4 things in common. People of the promise, the benefits of keeping the promise, the consequence of breaking the promise, and the physical signature or the cutting of the promise, sealing the deal. When it comes to the covenant of marriage, sex is the cutting of the covenant. In a sense, sex is like a key and marriage is like a lock that it fits inside. The benefits of a healthy marriage, which is the reward of keeping the promise, are held inside, guarded by the lock. If you mess with the key, you're gonna have a lot of challenges with the lock. So marriage is a promise made by a whole life for a lifetime that says, in sickness and in health, for richer or for poorer, till death do us part. I will love every part of you with every part of me. I'm signing it all over to you. And the signature on that promise is my body. You know what happens when you surrender your naked, raw, awkward, passionate, unfiltered, unauditioned self to a person that has promised to love you with everything they are, year after year, decade after decade? You start to feel really, really loved. Now, how are you gonna trade that treasure for some hot thing that made you jizz your pants when you were already horny as heck? All right, we're getting there. It's the last category of sexuality in the Bible, instruction. This is where I'm actually going to deliver on my promise. And like I said, I'm going to give you 2 powerful boundaries that are going to help you fight for purity and flee from temptation. But make sure you hear this biblical instruction. There are 2 ideas that we can hang a couple of key verses from that I think really help sum it up. The first idea reveals God's standard for exactly what sexuality is. And 3 great verses that reveal that are in Exodus chapter 20, verses 14, and in verses 17, and in Matthew chapter 5. The commandment in verse 14 is easy to understand: do not commit adultery. But verse 17 also talks about sexuality, but not like in the sense of where you do or do not put a penis. I told you I'd bring up oral sex, and this is where it is. Verse 17 is about wanting something that is not yours. Not necessarily what you want to do to a penis or vagina or hands or mouth, but if what you want to do isn't with somebody that you are covenantally married to, that's a problem. And then in Matthew chapter 5, verse 28, Jesus brings it right home. If you use your eyes and your mind to entertain sexual activities, in God's view, that's equal to actually physically committing the deed, because unlike any person, God sees and judges the person you are on the inside. So God's standard for the kinds of physical intimacy that only belong inside covenantal marriage include your mental sexuality. That's a really hard pill to swallow for a lot, if not all of us. The second big idea in Ephesians chapter 5, and that's that the expectations we have for rewards inside of marriage and hardships inside of marriage are both way lower than what God has planned. See, the reason for a covenant is that the rewards outweigh the hardships, but the hardships to get the rewards are significant. So difficult that Jesus' disciples thought that it might be impossible. And the reward versus sacrifice is so intense that in Ephesians 5, God compares it to the redeeming sacrifice that Jesus paid for us in order to save and enjoy us in his kingdom forever. That is how the expectations of sexuality and marriage are played out in the Bible. So you need to hear this promise from God in 1 Corinthians 10:13. God is faithful, and he will not allow the temptation to be more than you can stand. And when you're tempted, he will show you a way out so that you can endure it. In that passage, God is promising you that if you want to pursue a godly sexuality, he will deliver you through temptation. But it is going to be a matter of endurance. That endurance will need to stay intact while you're married, because temptation doesn't end. And you're gonna have to learn how to wait. Boundary number 1, know the difference between dating and covenantal marriage, and then pick one. Don't try to have both. Marriage is great. You get to have a lot of sex with somebody that's decided to love you with the rest of their life. Dating is great. You get to spend time with someone while you make a decision about whether or not you want to commit the rest of your life to them. Boundary number 2, seeing as God's purpose for sex only exists inside a covenant marriage, then just make sure you don't do anything sexual unless it's with the person you are covenantally married to. What is sexual? Here's a memorable and easy way to figure out if something is sexual. Imagine your future husband or wife sitting on a couch and doing something platonic with your sibling. Playing checkers. How platonic? Now they're giving each other compliments. How sweet. Now your spouse is brushing your sibling's cheek and telling them how beautiful they are. Now they're kissing. No! 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 You get the idea. It's easy to tell what's sexual when you imagine someone that you're committed to doing it with somebody else. If you don't want them to engage in that activity with somebody else because of how sexual it might be, then it's sexual. There's a ton of stuff that I've left out. But if there's anything specific on your mind, then please let me know in the comments. If you would love to see Maggie in a follow-up video, then let me know about that in the comments below as well. There's a ton of amazing resources I use to study this topic, and I'd love to share them all with you. I'll do my best to put them all in the description below. If I can recommend a specific channel for this exact subject, it's Paul and Morgan's channel. They're amazing, and I really love the content they're creating. Go check them out. They're linked up below. Pixel Pulpit is a brand new YouTube channel and podcast, so if you like what you see, then give us a thumbs up and please share it with a friend. And of course, that's all for now. Bye.